Welcome back to episode 52 of the Weekly Boost podcast. We made it a year, Ben. That's pretty incredible. We're going to give you something special today. Our episode's going to be kind of an overview of the past year with us. We're going to talk about some of our favorite episodes, some of our favorite moments as well. But just want to preface, when we talk about our favorite episodes, we generally like every episode that we release. We wouldn't release it otherwise. So we're not really talking about, we prefer a guest over this other guest. We're just talking about moments on our podcast that made it more memorable for us as well as an audience. So that's kind of where we're going at with this, but hope you guys enjoy.
Yeah, I'm we don't do things conventionally these past like month or so. I think it's like the summer scatterbrain we got going on. Because I mean, we did the draft of 50 states, number 51. Like, why didn't we do 50 for the 50 states? Like that wasn't very well thought out. And then, like, do you consider this our like year episode, or would the next one be, since we haven't completed 52 yet? I thought about this before we sat down to record. I'm like, what do we think? Great. Like, whatever. We're going to roll with it. Yeah, we're going top 5 moments, top 5 episodes, some honorable mentions, and just kind of talk through. We did this before with our guest recap, when we had a couple guests in a row. We're like, okay, let's take a step back and think like, hey, why? Like, what did we take from this? And some of the moments from there. And then if anything, it'll point people to some of the episodes that stood out to us. And like you said, like, it's really hard to, it's like every episode is its own thing. So it's hard to like rank them, or at least I found it was hard. It was like, okay, I got to include this. Well, what about this? You know what I mean? So maybe we'll have some overlap, but who knows with like the president's one. I thought we'd have a pretty similar lineup, and all three of us didn't. So, yeah. So how do you want to do this? You want to go episodes first, and then we'll go moments and kind of.
But we're gonna, for all of our stuff, let's do like 5 to 1. So start with
I go, you go.
Yeah, and we'll just alternate.
Okay.
Yeah,
I have a couple honorable mentions for the top 5 episodes.
Let them go. Let's see.
I'll go that first. My first honorable mention is Michael's visit, the Saint Marinaire Madness. I thought that was just a great episode to kind of keep it light. I think it was like in the wintertime or like late fall, like November. I don't know. But it was a fun one. I think it kind of caught us off guard, and we had some good debates over whether or not something is whether or not Chuck E. Cheese can go the distance in the bracket. And I think that's and I think that's one episode or theme that will come, it will resurface. I hope.
I agree.
And then my second honorable mention is our Meet the Parents episodes. I think that was 12 and 14 or something like that. That was a good one because, like, we had talks where it's like, okay, like, how many family members are we going to interview? But I thought that was, it was 12 and 15. I thought that was a really good one for us to, like, gain our traction with the podcast and turn it into, like, what we want to talk about, at least in the beginning stages of our year-long, like, endeavor here. Because, like, just talking to your dad, I hadn't talked to your dad in that capacity, like, ever. Like, and hear about, like, his story and what kind of, and it also, like, shows us, like, how, like, where you're coming from with a lot of your opinions and things. Like, not to say, like, we're all just carbon copies of our parents, but, like, in the the most biological sense, like, we're like half, so I think it was a really good episode. And he's my dad always gives me crap that I've only been on once, like, whatever. So so he'll get a kick out of that one. But those are my 2 honorable mentions. Hopefully I don't offend anybody by including that.
So. No, but those are the good picks. Yeah, I completely agree about the parents one. It was a good place to ground us. And it was early on. I hadn't had a lengthy conversation with your dad probably ever too. So it was a good, opportunity to meet and kind of figure out, where's my co-host coming from, right? What is his background? And it was a good, step in the right direction for the podcast, I feel. So
and it set us up for, like, a way of not like formal, like, talking, but like a more serious conversation that was like, okay, like, I this is what I had to go through, or this is where I came from to get to where I am now. And I really like those. And I think, like you said, it's a good way to kind of ground us and get a, like, regroup after the first
Mm-hmm.
kind of the first few month episode jitters kind of, you're like, okay, like we got to get this, and now we kind of settle in and figure out who we are as like hosts and what we can do behind the mic, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get in with my number 5 just to start it off. Very early on episode, and it was centered around me, even though it was a guest episode, but it was the Roast of Austin featuring Patrick Van Dalen, because the stuff that we said in that episode, not only on camera but behind the scenes, it still echoes in my brain, and we still bring it up now and then. And it'd be nice to have him back on, talk about how he's doing again. But that one's my number 5, just because it was a good time to just roast Austin. And you guys did, and it was funny, and I liked it. So, that's my number 5.
And it's funny because, like, I had experience playing with Patty and playing with you, and then coaching with Patty and coaching you, like being on the coaching staff. Like, it was fun to bounce, and it felt like a Friday night practice where we're both down. Let's say, like, we were just having a good time, and there again, like those first early episodes, like we look back on them and like, there might not be the best but looking back on those, like that was fun. Like we had a couple old fashions during it, or at least I did, and Patty did. Like we had a good time to just kind of like reconnect, and that was the whole goal of the podcast in the beginning, right? Like, let's just start something, and even if it's just our friends that we have on for a while, like that's fine. It's a way to keep in touch when I'm hundreds of miles away, and we're all busy, and we just sit down for, it was like a Friday night or something.
It was 2.5, 3 hours, I feel like.
Let's
the episode's the longest episode to date, I think.
Oh geez, Starling Marte is going to the A's. Different.
Well, there we go.
Yeah. Anyway, hour and 36 of recording time.
And it was probably another that non-recording time.
Yeah. That was one of our best performing episodes, obviously in the beginning, but Patty is a really good friend of the pod. So I'm happy that cracked the top 5, because I don't have that one in there. But again, that's one of those that really stands out when I look at, the first 10, let's say, and 50, I guess, if you reach out further. But my number 5, this was something that took a little while to get going. I'm guessing it'll appear in your top 5, but I could be wrong. But our episode with John Mosley, that was a fun one. It is one of our few instances this past year where we have somebody that we not necessarily like grow up watching, or like we see someone and you get, like in this case, the Netflix special, like you see how they coach and you're like, wow, this could be a good conversation if we could have them. And it wasn't necessarily like, oh, we got to have this big name guest. Like we both have said, like his coaching style is unique in the sense that it's very real on the show. And he talks about that in our episode. And I really appreciated that conversation, and, not having been in a position to coach for, over a year now, it was nice to kind of revive that mentality that you have, and like developing players and making sure they have the best experience and understand what it's all about at the end of the day. So that was my 5.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that brings us into our first moment, or my moment anyway. And it was that entire episode. It was discussing the coaching style that you just mentioned and how important that was, and realizing that you and I had a conversation with a individual that has been seen by millions of people and commented and critiqued on his coaching style, and gave us feedback on how to become better, players, athletes, teammates, coaches, whatever. And like that still hits deep, to this day, because sports obviously were a crucial part of our lives, still are. We're still trying to keep in the loop with everything. And those relationships that Coach Mosley talked about in there, whether it was player coach, player fans, whatever, it means the most to the sport. And it was just it was an excellent moment, I think, kind of solidifying our scope and our perspective on sports, I feel like. So it was a good time.
We both had been out of it, right? Like we had a chance to reflect, because when you're in it, like you want to win and all this stuff, and you're really focused on that. But like as a coach, or if you take a step back from everything, you like realize how sports fit into what we do every day. And when did that happen? That was like in May, right? Yeah, that was 41. So it's been 10 weeks or so. But that was a good one. And you're right, that moment, like his whole life is under like a magnifying glass throughout that. Like he was talking like he forgets that he has the mic on when he goes to the bathroom or like whatever it may be, and it takes him. But his authenticity, I think, speaks volumes for what that program does and what coaches can kind of aspire to be moving forward. So you want to get into number four for you?
So my number 4, and a little theme here of my episodes, they mean something to me in a little bit more of a personal way. They help either guide me in the right direction or kind of recenter me on the podcast. And that was with your uncle talking about Alaska. That was something that it was like one of the first times that I had a conversation with somebody where my dream and my aspiration of visiting all the continental national parks and then kind of having that last frontier being Alaska, it was made into reality for me. And it like helped me start like not planning, but looking at stuff, kind of becoming more associated with the National Park Service, with our conversations and stuff like that. And so it was a really grounding episode for my, I don't want to say like spirituality, but like
go for it.
Like I guess that's what
I think
it's
ample,
like where usage. Like how my what my soul needed at the time and what it still needs is like that connection with nature. And that episode really reinvigorated that. So that's my number 4.
I'll get into that later in the second half when I talk about my moments, but that was a good episode. And the point of reflection that came after that. Air. That's kind of why I want to save moments for later, because I have a lot of things that didn't necessarily occur that our listeners and viewers have seen. But if your moments come up with my episodes or whatever it may be,
that's what I was
all means like share because I think that's a really good this all of them are difficult for me because I really enjoy the ones where it's like just us opening up, but for me it's another guest. She has a big following, a lot of critics. The anti-social studies one that we just kind of wrapped up not too long ago, that one, episode 48, so it was about a month ago. That one for me was really great because it was one of those things where like I wasn't actively like looking for content and I found it and I'm like, wow, this is like puts a good perspective on it. And it's like doing the work that historians struggle with a lot of times and finding a way to like reach a greater audience in a way that's going to like understand, or like that'll help others understand kind of what's going on and why things matter. I think for me was really important, and that's why I enjoyed that episode so much. And despite almost spilling a cup of tea all over my laptop, we had a really good conversation, and I know you enjoyed that one too. And I kind of rope you into all this historical stuff. So, but I think that was a really good one for everybody, and it's really pertinent to today, especially with like the January 6th Commission investigations going on right now, and like being open-minded in a way that allows for good dialogue. And I like that one a lot. Yeah.
And I'm going to be quite honest. And I know you just mentioned the thing about moments, but I'm going to share my next moment with you because it wasn't like a realization, but it was something that I never learned about. And history books never taught me this, but George Washington's teeth. When she told that story, I'm not saying I was blown away by it because you can kind of put 2 and 2 together. It'll make sense of the times, but like, it was realizing that not everything is as it seems when you're taught about it in history class. And it kind of takes a certain level of teacher talent as well as kind of awareness to teach like I don't want to say the middle of the road conceptions of history, but look at it from both sides. Like, we idolize George Washington a lot. He deserves to be, put in that place because of what he did. But, just like everybody else, he's got some stuff that, sheds a little shade on him, and it, puts a little dust on his name. But
and maybe this is a moment from there that doesn't crack my top 5. But when we talked about Confederate monuments and like when she says, like, she, says, okay, go do your own research and find, like, and she even said, like, maybe that's a lot. Maybe that's, people will think I'm doing too much, or I'm like leading them to a foregone conclusion and like a predetermined way that she wants them to think about it. But the when it was constructed and what it's memorializing and commemorating, I think those two things are really important, because that is the motive for creating that, right? Like, why else would it come up during a spark in civil rights talks, or why else would it be glorifying Robert E. Lee, let's say, instead of like a monument to Confederate veterans who fought for, like, I feel like those are different enough conversations. And that episode for me, in that moment in particular, helped clear up and think about it in a different way. Being from like Wisconsin, where it's like when you see a Confederate flag, you're like, oh, what's going on here, man?
A little bit.
Yeah, as opposed to kind of now being in the southern half of the United States. But so what are we on, 3 here?
Number 3, yeah. And this one for me was a struggle, because I like to group all of these episodes together into one sort of campaign, because it meant a lot to us. But I'm going to go probably the episode that made me realize that I don't know as much as I should know about these subjects, because it affects more people. But it was our cancer statistics episode, kind of like in the bulk of our cancer awareness, cancer research, ACS collaboration campaign. We sat down, you and I, and we researched topics of interest. So for you, it was health equity in medicine, and history of public health and sort of those sorts of responses. And for me, it was the brood of the molecular technique and the genetics behind it. And it solidified like the idea, like, hey, I'm going to school for this. You're going to school for what you just looked up. Like, and look at the application that we just made on this platform.
Absolutely.
We connected with a multi-million person network that helps people that are stricken by a disease that we attempt to cure every day, but it's one of the most difficult things to kind of grasp as a human race, is like that this disease from within is causing this much affliction. And so for me, that was just a strong month of episodes, because it was like our flagship of what we wanted to do with our lives. And it was really cool that we were able to work that all out. And I know that I had to pick one episode, but that those 4 or 5 in that month or so were really solid for me, and they helped me a lot. So
that's I hadn't thought about what was that, episode 39, where we had an overview of what they have done in cancer research and things. That was a really important episode too for us, because it was like the first one of that campaign, and we were like, wow, this is a big deal. And the 4,000 plus people that work at ACS and the millions of people that have been affected by it, by cancer, are I thought that was a good episode for us to kind of get our feet wet in bringing to light something that's not only important to us, important to, like you said, many people around the globe.
It was a good time. It was a good time talking about it.
My number 3 was our first episode with Cassidy. That was a great story. I've gotten great feedback from listeners. Wow, she's got a great story. And like you said, like, what did you say? Experience over age. She just like exhibited this, like you said, this like maturity and way of thinking about things. That, well, what did she say about like the, we can edit this part, but when she talked about, that, like, I couldn't do that or whatever. Was that this episode? Either way, in her story, she said like, well, I couldn't do that or whatever. And when other people were like talking about it, and like, well, you don't know that until you actually go through it. And you can be authentic about your feelings and your emotions throughout the process. That she wasn't positive all the time. Like, there were days where, FaceTiming with the basketball team was all the more important. So that's my number 3. I think both of the episodes with her have been great. She's a friend of the pod, and I'm glad that we were able to kind of have those 2 episodes for sure with her, and potentially more in the future.
And I'm going to jump right in here with my, my third moment. No order with these, but as you bring up episodes, they correlate with my moments unintentionally. So, but yeah, just learning about Cassidy's story. I like having gone to school with her, didn't really know her too well. I knew of the story somewhat, the kind of superficial stuff, like what was happening and, how it impacted the college, how it impacted the team, and somewhat how it impacted her. I could have kind of assumed because, my background in biology and stuff like that, I understand what was going on, but sitting down and listening to, her outlook on life from a particularly nasty diagnosis, and sitting down and telling us like how she stared it in the eyes and said, I'm not going to let this, take over me. Like, I'm not going to let this beat me. And it was triumphant of a story, if I'm going to be honest with you. It was one of my probably all-time, not even just podcasts, but one of my all-time favorite stories to hear, just because of the grit that she possesses to this day. Obviously it's an ongoing thing, but hearing her successes of the first time she was able to step foot on the basketball court after all of the treatment and those long FaceTime calls and all that sort of stuff, like it was a story you could get behind. And you could not picture it, but you could visualize it because her storytelling was accurate as well as from the heart. So it was very good. Yeah.
Well, and she had I'm sure she had a ton of people, like an outpouring of support and everything. But I'm glad it was like a real conversation about the story. Like it wasn't just like the newspaper version where it's like, you know what I mean? Where everything is like,
I know what you're talking about.
It was like authenticity for me is something that's very admirable and very important for people to possess and have a real conversation about it. That's what I think I liked most about that. So top 2 now.
Yeah, top 2. This is tough. Yeah, this is tough.
Very tough.
So, quite possibly our worst performing episode, but number 2, book club. I love that episode, awesome. Primarily for one reason, and we don't get to talk about, we talk about it all the time when we're, oh, Ben, what book you reading? Austin, what book you reading? Kind of a question. But we were able to sit down and discuss some of the stuff that we found interesting in these books. And maybe we should have saved it for a different platform. Maybe we should have used it for our little TED Talk, if we're going into the teaching realm kind of a thing. But we thought that it would be a great, opportunity to introduce kind of how we look at things, in a primary source or a secondary source, whether it was journal articles, books, or magazines, or whatever, and how we digest and kind of analyze that information. And it is, however, unfortunate that the episode was not up to our performance standards by any means, but it was from the heart, and it was very early on too. We thought it was a great idea. I would be down to do another one. I don't know what the be on your itinerary, but I love books, what they do for people, regardless if you're fiction, nonfiction, reference, how to, whatever. They do so much for people, and I'm not saying that this is a fear of mine, but it's sort of that unconscious kind of thought, what happens when we go completely bookless? That's a weird thing to say, but it could be closer to reality than you think because of the upcoming, and everyday innovation of technology that we have. It's nerve-wracking to some people if you think about it. But that episode was just a fun one for me. I was able to talk about books that nobody else wanted to hear. So
the drop off from
it was so bad.
The roast of yours to having Drew and Josh on, the sandwich in between could have performed better. But that's all right. I enjoyed that one too. My number 2 was one that you were not present for.
The only episode that you and I have not been together to record.
The show had to go on.
It did.
Austin had mono. We were able to. That's a funny story too, because he had told us one Friday it didn't work, or one day of the week didn't work. You were all ready to go.
Yep, I was hyped. I was pumped. I was feeling good.
Roller coaster of emotions. Ended up not able to record that day. His phone died, and get a message the next morning, and it's like, sorry, so sorry, like let's reschedule, whatever. But the episode with Michael Ambus, really great one for me. I know you weren't a part of it, but you were saying, listening back, like that was a strong one. Talk about another guy that gets real with the story. Like he's been through more than you think, through juniors and kind of the grind of getting to the NHL. That one was important for me too, because, I didn't grow up watching him, but throughout high school, you see him and you meet him, and you have a conception of how he is on the ice. Like his persona on the ice is so much different than what he's like off, and the family man that he is now, and just a nice guy overall. Being able to talk with him about what his what Nomadic Designs is up to. I saw they just moved into a new shop.
That's awesome.
He's succeeding, and we were happy to support him around Christmas. I think my parents got a cribbage board. I got a cutting board. Like that episode was great because from the beginning, it's like, all right, like, what do you want to talk about? Like, I have like so much to share. And again, there's like an early episode where it's like one of our bigger name guests, and it's like, all right, like, how's this going to go? Like, I know you weren't a part of it, unfortunately, but I think that the conversation really flowed well, and we were able to just kind of talk through other interests in life after hockey and other things. So I'll plug that episode again, because that was a good one for me.
Yeah, it's a good pick. And I know we always talk about what happens if another co-host goes down again, and obviously the episodes do just fine. So
but it was also important for us to have to be on a weekly schedule. To show up every week with something. And if that means some of our episodes aren't as strong performing because it's us talking about books, so be it. But I think it's very gratifying for us to look back and think, like, we made time for this, and this is real for us. That every single week we showed up with something, and if you guys liked it, great. If you guys didn't agree with something that we talked about, fine. But for us, that was an important notion, to show up every Monday at 8.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
All right,
thinking about it. This is the one big time. I'm gonna go a little selfish here, and it was kind of a collaboration with you and I. We noticed that a lot of episode ideas were being generated via one kind of perspective, and that's perfectly fine. I was very open to it. And you sat down one day and you sent me a message. You're like, I want you to sit down and just think about like episodes that you want to talk about, make some episode ideas. And so one of the first ones that I made was the STEM stories, kind of talking about, science and STEM and, equality in medicine kind of a deal. And that was a great episode. Love that episode. That was probably an honorable mention for me. But the episode that takes the cake for me really sits in a great place, because I was able to be as passionate about something as I could possibly be. And that was the microbial world episode, because I was able to sit down for 50 some minutes, and, you were able to pick my brain on certain stuff. Like when we talked about, I think CRISPR was in that
CRISPR.
That one was, that's a, mental pretzel in itself, talking about that puppy. But I was able to feel passionate about something. And I'm not saying that the, other 49 or 50, 51 episodes, whatever, I don't feel passionate about, but it was like something directly from my heart that I was able to project to you guys and feel physically capable of answering those questions. Like that feeling of imposter syndrome, like not feeling like an accredited person in a subject, even though you technically are. Like we both graduated with bachelor's of science, like we should feel some sort of credibility with what we say, but we struggle with that episode. I didn't feel that for like one of the first times, because it was like, this is what I know. I know that this is 95, 99% accurate, and I'm going to stick with my guns on this one. And it paved a way for me to think positively about who I am in the world of science, as well as who I am as a co-host on here. Like I have the opportunity to be passionate about a lot of these things that we talk about. And maybe for me, it just required me to put in a little more effort. And that was probably the deciding factor of that episode. It was like, hey, if Austin actually puts in the effort that he intends to, good things happen for him. So it's kind of a little personal, but
I'm glad you picked that one, because that's not in my top 5, but I would lump that 45, 46 as one kind of for you, because you took the lead and you're like, and that was coming right off of our May campaign, and I was like, all right, like, where do we go from here? Like, I don't want to turn this into, what I'm looking at and reading all the time. Let's shift a little bit. And you're right. Like, I think that was another moment / episode or set of 2 episodes that kind of you were able to take the lead and say, wow, this is something I'm really passionate about. And like finding ways to like little victories to overcome imposter syndrome wherever you can, even if it's in these 2 episodes, this hour and a half that we talked. I think that's a win in and of itself, because it's very crippling at times.
It is. Yeah. So let's hear your number 1, Ben. Let's get
my
into
number
it.
1. Can you guess it? Well, I'll give you a chance here. I'll give you 2 guesses before.
Well, hey, let's reverberate. Let's go through your top 4 so far.
Okay.
And then so that way we can go from
number
there.
5, I have John Mosley. Last Chance You. Number 4, I have Anti-Social Studies. Number 3, I have Cassidy, the first one. And number 2, I have Mike Leambus's episode.
Okay. So if history tells me anything, you have 4 guest episodes as your 4 of your top 5. And from conversations in the past with you and I, you love our episodes where it's just you and I talking, because we're able to just pick each other's brains and just be, whatever. But you really do like the guest episodes, and I am struggling to figure out who it is. There's a name that you haven't mentioned. And I don't know if I want to go with that one, but I'm going to go with our number 1 episode. That's a shocker, I know, but it's the thing that started it off.
Interesting. So which one is it you're saying?
I'm going to say it's Pilot, but I know I'm probably wrong there.
Pilot is not my number 1. It was our number 1, but it's not my number 1.
Okay.
One more guess.
Kilmer's episode.
Nope, you are heavy on the front half. My number 1 episode was number 20 with the meteorologist I grew up watching every night, Mark Bain.
I was sitting there thinking about. I can't mention that episode. I would feel bad if it wasn't it.
What a great time! From guest inquiry to execution of the episode. Stand-up guy. It was published right before Christmas. That was yes, and we were able to talk about some serious things like climate change, but we were also able to talk about like meteorology and the path to that, and how important that network of meteorology can be for people. Working through failure and really poor jokes that they make about him. Brody loved his hair. So,
I was just gonna say that's Brody's favorite episode.
Yeah, Brody's favorite episode. I had a great time talking to him.
I did too.
And the passion that he just showed with the city of Milwaukee, and then being able to stream the Milwaukee Bucks championship parade, and him and Dan Needles covering it from WISN 12 was great. It was awesome to see that full circle where he gets to be in Milwaukee for a championship, and kind of feed off Milwaukee's energy, and he brings that to the weathercast every night that he's there, and a great guy. So I had to go with that. And you're right. My top 5 has a lot of guests, and I do enjoy those because
I do too.
You can really pick their brains and understand what got them to where they are now. So that's my top 5. I know there's a lot that I left out.
That's excellent.
But that's a good one. Let's get into an ad break here, and then circle back. I will share my top 5 moments, and you can fill me in on the rest of yours.
Sounds good.
All right. So I know you shared some of your moments already, and that's great because it comes up. Some of mine overlap too, and I am excited because most of mine did not occur on the air. So good. I will share my first honorable mention, or not honorable mention. I'll just start with my number 5. Number 5 for me was the process / leading up to the Kilmer episode, number 3. Man, I sent I had saw something on Twitter saying he'd love to be on fans podcasts, right? So So I emailed him and said, like, we're just starting out. We'd love to have you, like things like that. It had to be like 4 minutes later. He responded, said, sure, like let's find a time and place. I was over the moon. That was great. Like that was the first instance of like reaching out to someone. We had just finished up pilot, released that beast of an episode. And then we also had the Almost Perfect, where we kind of like got rolling with an actual episode. And I know I had used the podcast studio at school in the library, but this was the first guest where it was like, holy cow, like this is a big deal. So leading up to the episode, we're prepared. We have this like list of questions, this direction we want to go with the podcast, really detailed. And we show up to the studio. We tell them the time. This is all great, and doesn't show up on time. We're like, all right, like maybe he's like having trouble with the Zoom, whatever. Starts posting on his Instagram story. Okay, and like maybe he's like, I don't know what we were thinking at that point, right? Like,
yeah.
So
I think it was more of a maybe he just forgot.
Yeah, maybe he just forgot. So I sent him a message. I said, hey, like, let me know if you have any difficulty getting into the Zoom thing. No response.
Yeah.
So then I was like, okay, well, I only have this podcast studio for X amount of time. So I waited another half hour. So we're about an hour in, right? And I said, hey, like, if you can't join today, like, we should try to find a time to reschedule, whatever. Almost like immediately, I'm reading a book for the first week of grad school, and Kilmer shows up, and he's on his phone too. So he was busy either shooting a video or he was at a recording session, he said. But that was funny. That one for me, like, not necessarily. The episode was great. It was great to hear from him. But the roller coaster of emotion leading up to it was like, oh my goodness, like we're gonna get Kilmer on the pod, and then it turned into, okay, he's an hour and a half late. Like, what do we just like leave, or like holding on to that little piece of hope?
Hope. That's a message for all of our listeners. That what, if not at first, you
and sometimes a little message can go a long way. Like but that was number 5 for me.
That's excellent, because time. That's one of, I have moments from that episode, and it's something that hits home to me, because it's what I said.
It came from your mouth.
It came from my vocal cords. But so we're in the middle of a conversation, and we're talking to Kilmer about stuff, whatever, and we're gonna say this: the internet quality, not the best.
Not so great.
Internet connection. He was filming it outside, with his phone, and he's at Stevenson Ranch in LA, and right next to LAX, of course. So, and like clockwork, big old airplane flies over the top, and out of nowhere, Kilmer just stops. He goes, "Whoa, that's a big airplane," or something. Like, he says something really, and I go, "Yeah, it's a big boy."
Yeah, he goes, "Don't you that airplane?" It's like, how could you not? He's like, "Yeah, it was a big, it was a big boy." It's like, oh my goodness.
So there it is. That's the kind of episode 3 starting us off really great on our train of ad lib moments, or audio bites, whatever. But it was just something that stuck around for probably 30 episodes. I don't know.
We can revive it if you want.
We poked fun of myself fairly often with that. So that was a good one, but great episode, because, Mike, as you may know, John Kilmer is a producer of, many of his works. We love his stuff. So it was cool for us to get that guy on the podcast.
Moving on here. Number 4 was the sequence of creating the podcast. That was that was number 4 moment for me this past year. Man, it was a fun story. I was just about to move. I had a bunch of guys over, and the next day it's like, I was thinking about making a podcast. It came to me in May of that year. I was like, man, I should try to, I should think about it. And I know we had talked about it, but like, okay, now what? We started with a legal pad and just like jotted down ideas, and had some really interesting names for it and logo design and stuff. And then you just kind of jumped into it. And I think that was without that moment, we're not here, but I think that was worthy of cracking the top 5 for me.
Yeah. My favorite is just because of that moment, a night of debauchery, heavy drinking, funny stories around campfires, plenty of yard games. And then what do we do the next day?
Yeah.
Hangoverly make a podcast.
Hangoverly.
There it is.
Absolutely.
But yeah, no, of course, wouldn't be here without that moment.
Yeah.
So that's a great one. I'm happy you had that one in.
Number 3, we already talked about, was our partnership with ACS. We were able to raise some money with these shirts and donate, quite a bit for a smaller podcast.
For us,
yeah. I think that was a big moment. So when we talked about it already, so I'll keep moving here. Number 2 is another moment that you mentioned. This was off the air, but it was after our episode with my uncle. And I'm really glad this was your top. I think this is your number 4 moment or episode.
Yep. Fourth episode.
That was, I still have the Post-it note on my desk here. But he's like, okay, what's going to happen when you run out of family members to interview? Like, what are you going to do? And I know we hadn't had only family member, guests on prior to that, but it was a really good point of inflection where it's like, okay, he's right. Like, what do we want to be about? And that was episode like 16 or something like that. So it was pretty early on, and it was a way to like think, what do we want to be about? How do we want to do it? And what does this like mean for us too? So I'm really glad you had that in your top 5 for episodes too, because that was in my moments. And I tried not to be like moment from the episode, you know what I mean? So like it wouldn't be my list wouldn't be identical. And then my number 1 is from one of my top 5 episodes, getting them confused. It is from my top 5, is from my number 3 episode. It was also a conversation that was had after the episode had ended. With Cassidy, we talked for a long time, probably the length of the episode at least. After, about all kinds of stuff, about books that we're reading and stuff that basically could have been an episode in and of itself. And she was just a great listener and a great person to bounce ideas off of. So that's my number 1 moment. And I, like you said, like there's so many things that we left out or whatever, but that's a good one.
I'd be ashamed of myself if I left this one out. It's another kind of mistake on my part, but kind of a cool little preview of possibly stuff coming, ahead for us. But it was our first episode in person together. And we had the lovely Matt Donovan on. It was a great conversation with him, Oklahoma's own. It was just a great conversation in itself. But how that started was fantastic, because we had no idea how we were going to set up 2 podcasters in the same room, trying to Zoom call a podcaster, not in the same room, right? And so we're sitting down and we're trying to figure this out, and we think we have it. We got 1 mic set up, 2 headphones plugged in, whatever. We got both computers going, and we get in, and I go to introduce the episode, and for some reason, audio was super laggy from real time to what I was hearing, and it was like I was talking in slow motion, and I didn't freak out, but I think I freaked out. I was like, I just can't do this. Because it was like Matt Donovan. It was just like really so bad, slow motion, and I just felt gross. So we had to scuttle that episode. And
well, I remember leading up to that, we were like, we should try to do an in-person one, since you're going to be down here. Like, you don't have your mic or anything, so like let's try to do something. And we had done an in-person like with guests before when Drew and Josh came down here to visit. But with this one, it was like, okay, this is it's an NHLer, it's a professional hockey player. Let's and then we had talked about setting it up in like the Memorial Union on campus.
We were on campus.
We're like dashing around trying to find a place to record an episode. And everywhere there is like mask indoors, so it's like, okay, well, it's kind of hard to record a podcast episode with a mask on, and especially if this was one of our first.
We wanted to be compliant.
YouTube
and
too,
like that.
Yeah,
and
it was one of our first actual videos. And then we were able to just use 1 microphone, and I think that turned out fine for what we needed for. But that's that was up there too. But no, I think it was a fun year, and I'm excited to kind of see what we can do being in the same place, whether that's in-person episodes, whether it's more in-person work on it. and we're happy and thankful for everyone that's, supported us along the way. If you've donated money, if you've listened to one episode, if you've listened to 51, thank you so much for the support with this. It makes it, like we said, a lot of the time this podcast is helpful to us. It's also helpful to listeners, we hope, and being able to provide you guys with content that is both insightful / somewhat comical when Michael comes to town.
Exactly.
It's been good.
But yeah, that's been our top 5 moments and episodes. We're really thankful again, like what Ben was saying, but can't do it without you guys. Can't go forward without you guys. But yeah, a year in the books.
It's crazy, wild.
It is.
Let's we got stuff planned coming up. I know I have not a lot of time leading up to the semester, and I know you're wrapping up. I like your bags boards behind you, and I'm excited to break those in down here, even though I'm terrible. Right. But all right, well, we will see you next week. What is that? August 9th? Gulp?
Yeah.
Jeepers. All right, we'll see you next week.
Yep.